Well, the age of show business is the age of television, according to Postman. Or the age of show business reached its full maturity in television, American style television. And here's, I think, the fundamental thesis is typography once dictated the style of conducting politics, religion, business, education, law, and other important social matters. Television now takes command. But what exactly does that mean? What is this pervasive influence of the biases of television? It's an important idea in Postman that media have biases, and that the bias of print media was towards logic, reasoning, argumentation, exposition, the kind of things that you do in your papers that you write for a class like this or any other class where you're asked to form arguments, to present opinions, and then defend them. What are the biases of television? And how do those biases show up in public discourse? Well, okay, that is what the latter half of the book seeks to do in different areas, in politics, religion, and then at the end, something really close to Postman's heart, since he was in the School of Education, I believe, at NYU, in education. Entertainment is the supra-ideology of all discourse on television. That is, it's the thing that transcends everything, that's everywhere. That is, that you'll find all sorts of different things on television. You'll find commercials, you'll find dramas and comedies, you'll find news, you'll find things that tout themselves as educational. But the one thing they all have in common is that they have a duty to entertain, always to entertain. So the problem is not that television presents us with entertaining subject matter, but that all subject matter is presented as entertaining, which I suppose is, again, another way of stating the fundamental thesis of the book. And certainly, Postman is angry in a way that Marshall McLuhan was never angry. Postman, if you look at the interview, this ironic interview where he talks seriously for a long time about his ideas on television, but he's a wonderful guy, seemingly, but he's no Marshall McLuhan. And the writing here is obviously a kind of takes a scolding tone. That is and the idea is that there are some areas of life where entertainment is misplaced, religion, education, and politics being the foremost in his mind. And so that we've reached this sort of disastrous point, according to Postman, where McLuhan, I don't think, would have ever said such a thing. What's the problem? Well, thinking does not play well on television. And, I think he's right about that. I'm not sure if thinking plays well anywhere. Having taught philosophy for many years, thinking is difficult. And I'm not sure about the so-called biases of print, whether or not entertainment was not one of those biases. But thinking, he's probably right about this, though, that thinking does not play well on television. It is in the nature of the medium that it must suppress the content of ideas in order to accommodate the requirements of visual interests. One of the things that I think is in the background that he does not go into, and certainly I suppose, it's not a history of television or a total analysis of the phenomenon of television, but one of the things he doesn't go into is the economics of television, especially network television. Network television is expensive, or at least I'm sure it still is, but it was enormously expensive at one time because it was so popular. So what was done with the time had to turn into money for the people who were using it, who were selling it, who were buying it, who were employing it. Suppressing the content of ideas really means not giving time for reflection or exposition. in order to accommodate the requirements of visual interest. One of the things today, I suppose, that we have to think about in the third part of the course is the economics of something like Facebook, which, let's face it, was a disaster, I think, in the 2016 election. But what Facebook needs to do is to keep you on Facebook. And one of the problems that they ran into and continue to run into is the kind of things that they're willing to do to keep people on Facebook, keep on, how they manipulate people's news feeds and the kind of things that they're shown. Kind of similar, the imperative of network television was to keep you watching network television. So any thinking or exposition risked losing people's interest, just like an argument in a work of philosophy. If you read, say, Plato's Dialogues, there are some parts that are really joys to read. They're not the arguments. I mean, if you read something like, the dramatic parts of Plato's Symposium, The Drinking Party, or the Meno, or The Republic, these wonderful dramatic works, the most compelling parts, at least certainly in the first read or two, are not the pure logical arguments that Socrates engages in with his friends. They're the dramatic parts. So, the content of ideas really means reflection, argument, exposition, analysis, and that takes effort. And really risks losing the consumers. Let's face it, it's what we are when it comes to media. We're consumers of media. It risks losing the consumers' attention, and this is, of course, still a big issue with media. This constant moving from one thing to another, which television, network television at least, let's call it classical television. We no longer live in the age of classical television. I mean, we could go into a lot about the history of television since the 1980s and how it has changed drastically. I've tried to give some indication of that in my introductory thing about television in the 80s. But the now this thing, now this is commonly used on radio and television newscasts to indicate that what one has just heard or seen has no relevance to what one is about to hear or see, or possibly to anything one is ever likely to hear or see. The phrase is a means of acknowledging the fact that the world, as mapped by the speeded up electronic media, has no order or meaning and is not to be taken seriously. This is the similar thing where you said about the telegraph, that it forces us to burn its contents because a thing needs to be constantly fed. It's like a monster that constantly needs to be fed, and that means moving on and not having meaningful connections between the little, bite-sized pieces of information that are being offered us. And this is the quote from Robert McNeil. He's passed away. He and Tom Lehrer, I forget the guy's name, Jim Lehrer, I think, had a newscast on PBS, which is still on. It's now called the NewsHour. Has a different set of people, but it's much, it's a very serious newscast. You can get it on YouTube. I subscribe to it. It's really an hour long, in-depth nightly newscast. But McNeil, in talking about his experience in commercial television and commercial networks, that bite-sized is best. That when you're trying to put together not only a newscast that has some value, but also one that will get ratings, that it's best to keep things in manageable little bite-sized chunks rather than going to the kind of exposition that he and Jim Lehrer did in their show, which is a wonderful show. I couldn't recommend it more. If you want to really be informed, it comes on 6 o'clock every night on the PBS affiliates, but it also comes on YouTube if you're not watching TV, as frankly I'm not. I haven't watched classical TV in years. The television, and again, what does that mean now? That I consume is purely through streaming services like YouTube and Netflix and Hulu. And here's the thing that I referred to when I was showing you that really funny little commercial from 1980. The overall effect is that it produces in us the illusion of depth, the illusion of knowledge. We we get these little bite-sized chunks from commercials, from newscasts, from dramas and comedies. We pick up these little bits and pieces, we human beings. And, it's not like anyone's actively trying to gaslight us or misinform us, although now, that's no longer true. I mean, the Russians tried to misinform us in the 2016 election. It's proven. But maybe we can get to that in the third section of the course. But Postman is not accusing anyone of nefarious intent. He is simply saying this is the overall effect. It's disinformation is not exactly lies. It's information so cut out of context and so superficial, as he says, fragmented, irrelevant, misplaced, superficial, that it gives us just enough to think that we know something, that we're informed, but we're not. And this is the kind of delusion that we're prey to, that frankly, in a literary culture, a print culture, people had high standards of what it meant to be informed. What does it mean to be informed about a subject like, I don't know, global warming, or the problems of the treatment of immigrants and refugees throughout the world? I think in the old days, maybe reading at least one book would have been kind of the entry point to saying that you're well informed. But now the standards have changed, I suppose. And he goes on, I won't go through all the things that he talks about, but one of the things that and this is really a phenomenon of the 1980s, were the advent of these TV preachers, which is a cultural phenomenon of the time. He says, there's no doubt, in other words, that religion can be made entertaining. The question is, by doing so, do we destroy it as an authentic object of culture? And, this is the thesis that's in the title of the book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. If everything is dictated by the TV imperative of being entertaining, can it survive as an authentic part of our culture? Can our culture survive the show business attitude being taken into areas that it doesn't seem really to fit? Education, again, is a big one that he talks about at the end, but he also talks, obviously, about politics and religion. And these are serious things, and that entertainment is not meant to be the dominant mode of the way these things are presented. They shouldn't be presented as entertaining. They lose something essential. I had some observations here about television commercials. One can like or dislike a television commercial, of course, but one cannot refute it. Well, you can't refute it because there's no argument. And there's no argument because people don't really want to hear arguments, real arguments. And presenting a thing like, the Democrats have run out of gas, or Trump is a Cheeto, or Hillary Clinton is something, I don't know. People said things about her, made stuff up, and it was memorable, I guess. The television commercial has been the chief instrument in creating the modern methods of presenting political ideas. And that was certainly true in Postman's time. I do not know whether it's true now anymore. I think that if Postman were writing his book today, the one of the subjects that he would be deeply interested in is the meme. There were no memes in 1985. There were similar things. There were catchphrases, slogans, images that in their own way went viral in the way that things could go viral then. But it may be that the meme has supplanted the commercial as the dominant mode of presenting political ideas. I don't know, but it would be, from Postman's mind, equally disastrous, maybe even more disastrous, because it's even more superficial than a commercial. I mean, this is the longest part of the book, and really, he's presented his thesis about the supra ideology of television, the imperative to constantly entertain. and most of what he does in the second part of the book, which is fascinating if dated, is to try to show what the actual particular effects have been in these different areas.